Hello student, in the last lecture we have learnt about the abiotic factors of the environment. Of these we have gone through the light as an abiotic factor. Now the abiotic environmental factors can be classified into two basic classes, namely physical abiotic factors including temperature, quantity and spectral quality of light, depth of water, that is pressure, geomagnetism, gravity, wind and the precipitation, and chemical abiotic factors which include such factors as nutrient availability and pH. Today we are going to deal with the abiotic factor temperature. Temperature is one of the essential and obvious changeable environmental factors. It penetrates into every region of the biosphere and profoundly influences all forms of life by exerting its action through increasing or decreasing some of vital activities of organisms like behavior, metabolism, reproduction, ontogenic development and death. Temperature is a universal influence and is frequently a limiting factor for the growth or distribution of animals and plants. Normal life activities go on smoothly at a specific temperature or at a specific range of temperatures. This is called the optimum temperature or the optimal temperature range. Organisms react to any rise or fall of optimum temperature range, and biotic communities more often encounter alternations only due to extremes of temperatures. The interaction of temperature with certain other abiotic environmental factors such as humidity, etc. cause into many other climatic changes which influence the living organism in one way or another. Temperature is a measure of its intensity of heat in terms of a standardized unit and is commonly expressed as degrees on either the Fahrenheit or the Celsius rate. The temperature at the Earth's surface is governed by the brightness of the sun. The constancy of brightness of sun has remained virtually unchanged for about 3 billion years. The total amount of heat entering into the biosphere from the sun must balance the amount lost per unit time if temperature are to remain unchanged. Since the flow of geothermal heat from the interior of the earth is small by comparison and probably has been negligible for at least the past 500 million years. The estimate of this energy flow is referred to as the heat budget. Heat budget have been projected for the total surface of the earth as well as for the special environment. Now, the variation of the temperature. There occurs temperature fluctuations in the different environments. Different environments such as freshwater, marine and terrestrial environments are subject to varied response to fluctuating temperatures. Temperature fluctuations are comparatively less in the aquatic environment than in the terrestrial environment. The increase in depth of the aquatic medium often increases the temperature fluctuations. There exists a distinct difference in the response of the living organisms of the freshwater and sea to temperature fluctuations because of the presence of dissolved salts in the seawater. The minimum temperature in the sea is -3 degrees centigrade, while in freshwater ponds it never goes below 0 degrees centigrade. The maximum temperature of the ocean generally goes up to 36 degrees centigrade, but in shallow pools of fresh water and tight pools of littoral zone, temperature may go higher. In deeper bodies of water, heating and cooling are restricted to the surface strata, but the deeper layers also get a lot of heat as a result of what is usually termed vertical circulation, wherein due to circulatory movement of water, surface waters are brought to the deeper region and vice versa. Now let us discuss the zonation of vegetation in the aquatic ecosystem. Studies on the vertical changes of temperature have led to the hypothetical classification of the freshwater media into three strata. The superficial layer of fresh water is constantly stirred by the wind and is called epilimnion. It is the layer of warmer water and its temperature may rise up to 27 degrees centigrade during the summers. The stagnant water of the bottom, as you can see in the diagram, constitutes the hypolimnion. The hypolimnion has temperature of 5 degrees only. In between epilimnion and hypolimnion occurs an intermediate zone called the thermocline or the metalimnion, which has rapid vertical temperature changes. During winter, the temperature of epilimnion of a freshwater lake becomes 0 degree and the lake becomes to ice covered. Then the thermal stratification in the atmosphere. The process of differentiation of freshwater habitat into three strata is called the thermal stratification. In the terrestrial environment, the seasonal and daily fluctuations in temperature are varied and marked. The lowest temperature recorded for any land mass is 70 degree, as in the case of Siberia, and higher temperature may likewise go often 85 degree, as in certain deserts at noon. However, the water in hot springs and geysers may approach 100 degrees centigrade, and even higher temperature occurs sporadically in the very special situations presented by the volcanic areas. In Rajasthan, the highest temperature exceeds 50 degrees centigrade. On the land, diurnal variations of temperature are quite staggering. The fluctuations between day and night temperatures may be 17 degrees centigrade as in the ordinary land masses, or 40 degrees centigrade as in the case of deserts. In South Rajasthan, in Thar desert, there shows a diurnal changes of 20 to 30 degree for all the seasons. Difference in latitudes often causes variation in the annual temperature cycles with visible effects on the organisms. Further, with the increased altitude, for every 150 meters, the decrease in temperature of the 1 degree centigrade takes place. Now, the range of tolerance. Life in this universe exists within a range of minus 200 degree to 100 degree centigrades. Though normal life persists within narrow temperature limits of the about minus 10 to plus 50 degrees centigrade. Individual species survive in a smaller range and are active within even narrower limits. Many nematodes, rotifers and tardigrades have shown a withstand cooling to minus 272 degrees centigrade without ill effects. That is more important. Larvae of chironomids and certain other diptera have been found to thrive at temperature near 55 degrees centigrade. Praying mantis is reported to live in a bare grounds at a temperature of 62 degrees centigrade in the deserts. Some algae and bacteria are reported to live in hot springs at 88 degrees centigrade. Known photosynthetic bacteria inhabiting hot springs can actively grow at temperatures greater than 90 degrees centigrade. On the other hand, some Arctic algae can complete their life cycles in places where the temperatures barely rise above 0 degrees centigrade. Further, the eggs of acanthocephalon have been known to withstand temperatures from minus 10 to minus 45 degrees centigrade and for about 140 days, and desiccation and temperatures up to 39 degrees centigrade for a period of 265 days. The organisms which can tolerate very large fluctuations in temperature are called eurythermal organisms. For example, cyclops, toad, wall lizard, grass, snake, human being are the eurythermal animals. The organisms which can tolerate only a small variation in temperature are termed the stenothermal organisms. The common stenothermal animals are fishes, snails, coral, etc. In organisms, all metabolic processes necessary for life start at a minimum temperature and increases with rise in temperature until they reach the maximum level at a temperature called the optimum temperature. Further rise in temperature beyond optimum brings about decrease in metabolic rate until it ceases at a temperature called maximum temperature. Now the thermoregulation in case of homeotherms. In contrast to poikilotherms, birds and mammals can within limits maintain constant body temperatures regardless of temperature variation of air and water. Such animals are termed warm-blooded or the homeothermals. Their life processes are adjusted to function at the animal's normal temperature, averaging a little less than 38 degree in mammals and 3 to 4 degree higher in case of birds. If its temperature controls fails, the animal dies. The homeothermic animals are able to maintain the constancy of body temperature by a combination of several factors. Number one, a thermoregulating center in the brain, by insulation, and a peripheral vascular response to the ambient temperature and metabolic compensation. Among these factors, insulation is highly important, particularly in enabling a large Arctic animals to withstand very low temperature. If the temperature is lowered, the oxygen consumption rate of tropical mammals increases, whereas that of Arctic mammals remains basal. This response pattern is due to difference in the insulation. Some Arctic animals are fur insulated, whereas others are insulated with a layer of blubber. Many small animals, however, are not well insulated and must seek heat retention by other means, often by huddling together. Homeothermic animals living in very hot environments cannot tolerate greatly elevated body temperatures, and they utilize methods that facilitate heat transfer to the environment, including an increased peripheral blood flow and surface cooling by sweating or panting. Birds may accomplish this by rearranging their plumage so that more skin is exposed. There is, however, no reduction in metabolic rate. Animals subjected to high temperature may exhibit diurnal patterns of behavior, that is, they may reduce locomotor activity during the heat of the day or may move into the shade to avoid the direct sunlight. Now, the thermoregulation in case of the poikilotherms. An animal's response to wide range in temperature is influenced by its physiology. All invertebrates, lower chordates, cyclostomes, fishes, amphibians, and reptiles have no internal mechanism for temperature regulation, and their body temperatures vary with surrounding environmental temperatures. Such animals are called cold-blooded poikilothermic or the poikilothermal animals. The temperature range that a poikilothermic animal tolerates can be correlated closely with the environmental temperatures normally encountered in nature. Tropical temperatures, the animals which live in the tropical areas cannot withstand low temperatures. Polar animals cannot withstand high temperature. Temperate zone animals survive a wide temperature range. Many poikilothermic animals show a rather precise discrimination of temperature. If the temperature decreases or increases appreciably, these animals may tolerate and adjust to the change, may avoid the change by seeking a less exposed environment, or may become inactive. Some animals respond by becoming dormant during the periods of extreme temperatures. Such dormancy is called estivation at high temperature and hibernation at low temperature. For example, most poikilotherms become inactive when the temperature of their surrounding goes below 8 degree or rises to 42 degree. A few exceptional poikilotherms, especially insects, certain amphibians and reptiles, exercise a degree of thermoregulation by either physiological or behavioral mechanism. When temperature drops, lizards bask in sun to achieve the desired body temperature. Once this thermal level is attained, they will divide their time between the sun and shade to maintain it. Poikilotherms such as desert dwellers that live in environments where the temperature is apt to be very high are often nocturnal and thus avoid the highest temperatures of the day. Some poikilotherms, both vertebrates and invertebrates, lower their body temperature slightly by evaporative cooling. In frogs and reptiles, evaporative cooling can occur through the skin or via the respiratory tract by panting. Among the invertebrates, evaporative cooling has been reported in tropical intertidal zone animals. Various species shift between homeothermy and poikilothermy and are known as heterotherms. These include animals such as the pygmy mouse and the little pocket mouse, which respond to temperature extremes by estivating or hibernating, and others such as hummingbird, which experience a nocturnal drop in the temperature. Now, the effect of temperature on the plants and animals. As there is variation in the temperature, it affects the life of plants as well as the animals. It has significant role on the cells, morphology, physiology, behavior, growth, ontogenic development and distribution of plants and animals. First of all, we will discuss the effect of temperature on the metabolism. Most of metabolic activities of microbes, plants and animals are regulated by varied kind of enzymes, and enzymes in turn are influenced by temperature. Consequently, increase in temperature up to a certain limit brings about increased enzymatic activity, resulting in an increased rate of metabolism. For instance, the activity of liver arginase enzyme upon arginine amino acid is found to increase gradually and gradually. With the simultaneous increase in temperature from 17 degree to 48 degree centigrade, but an increase in temperature beyond 48 degree is found to have an adverse effect on the metabolic rate of this enzymatic activity, which retards rapidly. In plants, the absorption rate is retarded at low temperature. Photosynthesis operates over a wide range of temperature. Most algae require lower temperature range for photosynthesis than the higher plants. The rate of respiration in plants, however, increases with the rise of temperature, but beyond the optimum limit, high temperature decreases the respiration rate. The rate of respiration becomes doubled at the increase of 10 degrees centigrade above the optimum temperature, provided that other factors are favorable. However, optimum temperature for photosynthesis is lower than that for the respiration. Now, the effect of temperature on the reproduction. The maturation of gonads, gametogenesis, and liberation of gametes takes place at a specific temperature, which varies from species to species. For example, some species breed uniformly throughout the year, some only in the summer or in the winter, while some species have two breeding periods, one in spring and other in the fall. Thus, temperature determines the breeding season of most organisms. Temperature also affects the fecundity of animals. Fecundity of an animal is defined as its reproductive capacity. That is the total number of young ones given birth during the lifetime of the animal. For example, females of the insect Acridate became sexually mature at 30 degrees centigrade and 35 degrees centigrade than at 25 degree. And the highest number of eggs per female was laid at temperature of 30 degrees. The number of eggs decreased from 243 to 190 when the temperature was raised to from 30 to 35 degree. Likewise, in grasshoppers species Melanopus and Camnula pellucida, when reared at 32 degrees centigrade, produced 20 to 30 times as many eggs than those reared at 20 degrees centigrade. On the other hand, fecundity of certain insects such as cotton stem weevil was found to decline with an increase in temperature beyond 32.8 degrees centigrade. Now we will discuss the effect of temperature on the sex ratio. In certain animals, the environmental temperature determines the sex ratio of the species. For example, the sex ratio of copepod macrocyclops is found to be temperature dependent. As the temperature rises, there is a significant increase in the number of males. Similarly, in plague flea xenopsela, males outnumbered females on rats on days when the mean temperature remains in between 21 to 25 degrees centigrade. But the position becomes reverse on more cooler days. Now let us discuss the effect of temperature on growth and development. Temperature influences the speed and success of development of poikilothermic animals. In general, complete development of eggs and larvae is more rapid in warm temperatures. Trout eggs, for example, developed 4 times faster at 15 degrees centigrade than at 5 degree. The insect chironomid fly requires 26 days at 20 degrees centigrade for the development of a full generation, 94 days at 10 degree, 153 days at 6.5 degree and 243 days at 20 degrees centigrade. Now you can see how the temperature affects the development of the organisms. However, the seeds of many plants will not germinate and the eggs and pupae of some insects will not hatch or develop normally until chilled. The growth rates of different animals and plants is also influenced by the temperature. For example, the adult trout do not feed much and do not grow until the water is warmer than 10 degrees centigrade. Sea urchin, Echinus, shows maximum size in warmer waters. Corals flourish well in those waters which contain water below 21 degrees centigrade. Let us discuss the effect of temperature on the coloration of the animals or the organisms. The size and coloration of animals are subject to influence by temperature. In warm, humid climates, many animals like insects, birds and mammals bear darker pigmentation than the races of some species found in cool and dry climates. This phenomenon is called Gloger's rule. In the frog hyla and the horned toad Phrynosoma, low temperature have been known to induce darkening. Some prawn turn light colored with increasing temperature. The walking stick has been known to become black at 15 degrees centigrade and brown at 25 degrees centigrade. There is effect of temperature on the crossing over of the animals. In fruit fly Drosophila, temperature is shown to affect the crossing over and somatic expression of gene characters. For example, in the larva or pupae stage, wings tend to be longer at high temperature and shorter at low temperature. Now the effect of temperature on the morphology of the organisms. Temperature also affects the absolute size of an animal and the relative properties of various body parts. Birds and mammals attain a greater body size when they are in cold region than in the warm regions, and colder regions harbor larger species. But poikilotherms tend to be smaller in colder regions. Body side has plays a significant role in adaptation to low temperature because it has influenced the rate of heat loss. According to Brown and Lee, larger wood rats have a selective advantage in cold climates, apparently because their surface to air ratio and greater insulation permits them to conserve metabolic heat. For opposite reason, small sized animals are favored in deserts. Then the effect of temperature on the distribution of the animals. Because the optimum temperature for the completion of the several stages of the life cycle of many organisms varies, temperature imposes a restriction on the distribution of species. Generally, the range of many species is limited by the lowest critical temperature in the most vulnerable stage of its life cycle, usually the reproductive stages. Although the Atlantic lobster will live in water with a temperature range of 0 degree to 17 degree, it will breed only in water warmer than 11 degree centigrade. Generally, the distribution of shallow water marine species can be assigned to 4 types of zonation. In the first type, northward distribution is dependent on thermal lethal limits during the winter months, and southern distribution is dependent on summer temperature limits. In a second type, the thermal limits required for population determine the north to south distribution. In the third type of zonation, the thermal requirement for repopulation determine the poleward habitat in the summer, and the maximum temperature determines the equator ward survival area. Finally, the minimum temperature for survival determines the pole ward limit in winter, and temperatures limiting repopulation determine the south ward range. Terrestrial invertebrates, particularly arthropods, generally are distributed in all thermal environments where life is found. Many arthropods that have invaded the colder areas have one stage in their life cycle which is very resistant to cold, enabling them to overwinter until warmer weather returns. Birds and mammals are also adapted to live in nearly all thermal environments. The distribution of amphibians and reptiles, however, is limited to the relatively warmer thermal climates. Hawke has listed 3 factors that limit the invasion of reptiles into cold environments. The daily ambient temperature must be high enough to allow activity. The daily ambient temperature must be high enough and long enough to allow breeding and to allow adults and young to acquire food for overwintering, and there must be adequate sites for hibernation. Now, we have seen the effect of temperature on various aspects. Now, let us discuss the thermal adaptation of plants and animals. Most animals and plants of different ecological habitat have developed various sorts of thermal adaptations during the course of evolution to overcome the harmful effect of extreme of temperature. Some of the significant thermal adaptations of plants and animals are as formation of heat resistant spores, cysts and seeds, etc. Some of the animals and plants produce heat resistant cysts, eggs, pupae, spores and seeds which can tolerate extremes of temperatures. Amoeba is an insistent condition, can tolerate temperature below 0 degree. Similarly, rice seeds remain active even at 0 degree and can germinate at that temperature. As an adaptation against frost, the starch of plants changes to fats or oils in the autumn. The fatty oils depress the freezing point and thus increase the power of resistance in plants against the frost. Many leaves that grow in the colder lands store fats. Pentosan's mucilage and pectic substance, which have high moisture retaining power, are abundant in many plants. They decrease the danger of plants from desiccation during extremes of heat and save them from the death. Then, to avoid the temperatures, there is removal of water from the tissues. Dried seeds, spores and cysts avoid freezing because there remains no liquid in them that can freeze. Due to removal of water from seeds, the cold resistance of seeds of certain plants increases up to the extent that their exposure for 3 weeks to 190 degrees centigrade does not diminish their germinating capacity. Dormancy also is affected by the temperature. Dormancy includes 2 already discussed phenomena, hibernation and estivation. During both kinds of dormancies, metabolic rate becomes reduced, body temperature becomes low, and heat beat rate is also reduced. Then the effect of temperature another is thermal migrations. Thermal migrations occur only in the animals. The journeys taken by animals that enable them to escape from extremely hot or cold situations are referred to as the thermal migrations. For example, desert animals move to shaded places to avoid the burning heat of noon, and some animals like desert reptiles and snakes become nocturnal to avoid heat of the day. The frogs, toads, other amphibians, turtles, etc. make short trips into or out of the water, and this provides desired cooling and warming of the animals. I hope you have got all the information about the effect of temperature on the ecosystem, and in the next lecture we will deal with the another topic of the abiotic factors.